Hello, so today I wanted to go over Trait Tracker, which is a very powerful augment if you know how to play around it, but sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming and a little bit difficult if you don't have a set strategy going into it. So that's what today's video is going to be, a little bit of an introduction to Trait Tracker, as well as some tips and some general strategy that you can use in order to get the most out of it. If you like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you're returning from one of the other videos I've done, please make sure to check if you're subscribed because it does help me out as a smaller TFT content creator. We're actually working very close to our 10,000 sub goal. We're going to have an RP giveaway, so please look forward to that. I do daily TFT guides, so if you're looking for guides to get the most out of your set 14 TFT experience, then this is a channel that could help you out. But anyways, let's talk about Trait Tracker. So what is Trait Tracker? It is a gold augment, and it's basically kind of simple. It's been around for a while, but if you're newer to this playing TFT or newer to the set, you might have not seen it that often. But basically, the first time you activate 8 non-unique traits for one combat, you gain 5 random emblems. So it doesn't seem that crazy, but you can already see like the potential that it gives you. It gives you 5 emblems. 5 emblems is a lot, and you can make a lot of creative boards. You can activate a lot of synergies, which will pay many dividends even for a gold augment. So it's generally considered to be a very powerful thing, and a lot of times you might want to play towards it. However, it's a little bit awkward because you have to get to a cash out. Obviously, you have to activate 8 traits, so you're down a gold augment until you activate the 8 traits. So there's obviously like an upside and a downside, but at the same time, there's also like these crazy things that could end up happening. For instance, if you think about why Trait Tracker, why you should try and think about it, sometimes there's those instant win cases, right? Especially if you have Reforgers already, because as you can imagine, you get 5 emblems if you already have an emblem, or if you're playing Trainer Golems. I don't know if they banned it. They banned a couple augments from like Trainer Golems, so don't quote me on that. But like either way, the idea is that if you have a certain emblem, and you can maybe hit one of the prismatic traits, think 10 anima, where you need 2 anima emblems, you know, you have good chances, especially if you have Reforgers, to just hit amongst those 5, one of them being an anima, and then you have your instant win that you just have to convert it, get to the threshold, find your Aurora, and just win. That's sometimes why you think a Trait Tracker, but that's actually, in my opinion, one of the smaller reasons to play Trait Tracker. I think that's like the level 1 where you look at it and that's the immediate thing that lights up that you think that you're going to do. But realistically, when I look at Trait Tracker, right now it's getting a lot better because they actually just buffed a lot of the frying pan emblems, which makes it really reliable in just activating a lot of really good traits, but also those actual emblems have an ability that's often as good as an item. There's a lot of them that are really powerful that you would want to have on your board anyways, that you can use as an item to itemize your carries. So with the recent changes as well as the buffs, it's making Trait Tracker a little bit more popular, especially in the current set and especially in the current patch. So it's something you should definitely look out for. And additionally, it also counts as having a lot of items. So there's a lot of synergies with different comps and different other augments that can actually scale your team very aggressively by having these extra items, or quote-unquote items. They're technically emblems, but they work kind of like items. Just as another aside, I just want to talk a little bit more about the frying pans. So the frying pans, they have a lot of times unique abilities. A lot of them have been recently buffed, and a lot of them provide team-wide benefits, whether it be from the actual ability or the trait that it provides. So when you're thinking about like the emblems, when I say frying pan emblems, as you can see, like Anima Squad emblem, this is made with a spatula. So this is an emblem that you can get, but you can also get dropped something like a Bastion emblem. Bastion emblem is something that can give you a team-wide armor and MR, which is pretty nice if you activate 2 Bastion or 4 Bastion or whatever. But additionally, all of the frying pan traits also give you a bonus ability, so the actual emblem kind of has like an item effect to it. So as you can see with the Bastion emblem, gain 20% of armor and magic resist as ability power, so this can work really well on an AP carry if you're playing deep into the Bastion emblem traits. Additionally, we already know a lot about Bruiser emblem, but some of the ones that were recently buffed that are actually really potent and very strong: Dynamo emblem. Dynamo emblem gives you stacking damage amp, which works really well on a lot of units. You can just get an insane amount of damage amp from this item. Things like Marksman got recently buffed. It allows you, if you deal physical damage, to reduce armor by 3. This basically can reduce the armor down to like absurdly low numbers, so your team does an insane amount of extra damage. Things like Rapid Fire, you get +2 range. It can work really well in converting some melee carries into ranged carries, and the list goes on. A lot of these frying pan traits they give you something that's actually worthwhile, in addition to like activating a synergy that you can actually use on your board, which is part of the reason why Trait Tracker is something that you might not want to pass upon if you have the opportunity. Of course, you're down a gold augment in your mid game, so you technically are sacrificing HP and resources in order to actually hit it and cash it out and get going after that and have your difficult transition round. It's hard to play around, so it's a little bit awkward. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to get there. Something that's really important is just knowing some reliable cash out boards. What a cash out board is basically a board that activates all the Trait Tracker traits. So if you see the Trait Tracker, if you read it, you need to activate 8 non-unique traits. So you can kind of like try and airball it and figure it out on the fly, but it's really important to just know 1 or 2 of them, just so you have a little bit of wiggle room and you can kind of aim towards it. The common one that I usually go for is this one. So these are 3 different boards I'm going to show you, and they're all cash out on level 7. So you can usually get your Trait Tracker, right? You pick the augment on 3-2, it's when it's offered. So this would be like, you're playing towards a level 8 comp. You can actually cash it out before you actually get to stage 4, which is really important. You don't have to level to 8 to activate the 8 traits. There's some efficient boards you can actually activate on level 7. This is the common one. So basically you're building around the Jarvan, Mundo, and what's his name? Rost. And basically you just activate all the traits. So you have 3 Street Demon, 2 Bruiser, 2 Executioner, 2 Golden Ox, 2 Slayer, 2 Techie, 2 Vanguard, 1 Divinicore. So with Divinicore units, the Divinicore trait acts as a trait for Trait Tracker, so it actually becomes very efficient to play at least 1 Divinicore unit on your board, because you get 2 traits in if you activate another trait. Jarvan, Mundo, as well as even, in this case we're not using all 3 of Mordekaiser traits, but even Mordekaiser, you can see that we're using the 3 traits from Mundo and Jarvan. They have a trait that they share with one another, so they can both activate Slayer with each other, and then you can kind of build up from there. So if you don't have to memorize this board exactly, but you can kind of build from the fact that you're using a Mundo and a Jarvan. That's a similar theme we'll see in some of the other Trait Tracker boards. There's actually 2 other ones that you could know about. I think the other one that I usually use is this one, which is a Nitro version. So if you're playing around Nitro and you have a Nitro opener, which is a common thing, basically this is an Exotech Nitro board. Basically you have 3 Exotech, 3 Nitro, 2 Bastion, 2 Bruiser, 2 Dynamo, 2 Marksman, 2 Techie, and 1 Divinicore. And the idea is that you just play, in this case, you have Bruiser in your front line, you activate your Techie, Nitro, Bastion, and Bastion and Exotech by playing the Mordekaiser and the Gragas, right? And Gragas being the Divinicorp gives you the bonus trait there. So here we're making use of the Shyvana and the Mordekaiser as being your crux of your front line. Then we also have the Jhin. So, Shyvana, the main things that you're using is Shyvana, Mordekaiser, Jhin, and then you're activating as many of their traits as possible. You activate all of them, you get the board to go. So that's like, a rough way of memorizing it or knowing it. There's one more that I can show you, which is this one. This is very similar to the other one. You're basically using Mundo, Jarvan, Kayn, but in this case, you're just activating it with some of the other synergies. So this is using Alistar to get Golden Ox instead, Shyvana and Poppy and Vigar. So if you're starting with a more of an AP opener, this is a board you can probably find your way around. Now, you might be wondering how I got these boards. This one's the common one. I think everybody kind of knows this one if you're like in the loop or, if you talk about it. Usually it's like, hey, hold on to Mundo, hold on to Jarvan, and then you just kind of like, Scooby-Doo it by putting in the rest of the units that synergize with their traits. If you need to find a particular board, especially if you're cashing out, these are to cash out very efficiently on level 7, by the way, but it's hard to like do that because if you don't natural or find the units just off rip, you're likely not holding on to these units and you're having a little bit of difficulty. And then like if you're rolling on level 7 for these units or rolling on level 8, it becomes like a cluster and then it becomes really awkward. A tool that you can use, so this is on tactics.tools. I think there's one on every stat website. If you use a different stat website, by all means use your own stat website that you're comfortable with. But under tools, so tactics.tools, and then under the tools tab, there's a thing called perfect synergies. So here you can actually put it on trait tracker mode if you really want to, and it will show you the boards. As you can see, these are the board, like 3 of these boards are boards that I showed you. I'm showing you the level 7 ones that don't use 4 cost. Those are the ones that are typically the most important to know. But of course you can put it on different levels. You can apply filters to different units as well if you have the units, so you can try and get it to work. And you can exclude like different types of units, etc. So if you really need to and you're in the middle of the game and you're like panicking, you know, there's some other options like this that you can like try and fix it. But what I would recommend is usually just like either trying to play around, the way I memorize it is just Mundo Jarvan and then just throw in all the traits that work with them, or it would be Jhin, Mordekaiser, Shyvana. So these are the two that I usually remember and I go for because they're generally like ones that are more common. They're common like boards that you would be playing in your mid game anyways that you can then transition to in your late game. So you activate that. They have to be in for one combat. Then after the combat ends, you will get your emblems. I don't think you can do it on neutral rounds. I don't remember because it's been a while since I've played Trait Tracker in recent history. But either way, it's usually a player combat. After the player combat, you get your emblems. Now, when you talk about final boards, this is where things get a little bit confusing. So the first thing that I would always say is that you should always have a little bit of a plan going into Trait Tracker. You should have your item slam. You should have a rough idea of what board you're going to play. The board that typically people play with Trait Tracker in this set is Exotech. So usually there is a trait that scales off of quote-unquote items. Remember what we were talking about before? Trait Tracker gives you a bunch of components. They are technically items. They count as items in the game. What does this mean? Well, with Exotech specifically, if you read Exotech, gain unique items, blah, 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 blah. They gain health and attack speed for each item equipped. So for all of these units, if you put items on them, they will gain HP and they will gain attack speed. This is things we know already that we talk about with Exotech all the time. It's what makes it really efficient with a lot of different boards. But basically, if you have a lot of items with an Exotech board, you can turn that into HP and attack speed, which is actually very meaningful because if you have the Trait Tracker, you are up 5 items. It doesn't matter what the emblems are. If you put the emblems on, for example, Mordekaiser, this Mordekaiser is going to be gaining, you know, 200 HP for each of these emblems. You can put them on all your frontline units and you can become very tanky very fast without even thinking about the actual emblems and what they mean. Additionally, the Exotech board has a little bit of flexibility. It has the Inter-Bastion synergy, but a lot of times with the other traits, as you can see, there are a lot of traits that are there, right? There's Executioner, there's Marksman, there's Rapid Fire. There's a lot of things you can make use of, and there's actually good item holders for those things. Zeri, particularly, is very good with both Marksman. Well, Marksman is up for debate, but she's really good with Dynamo Emblem. It gives her so much damage amp. So there's synergies that you can actually just like run up and activate, and you have a good chance of hitting a couple of these. Now, you don't have to make a board that activates every single synergy, and especially if you're playing a board like Exotech, you still get value out of all of the emblems, regardless of if you activate the traits, because it works well with the Exotech board. Additionally, let's say you're playing more towards like an AP line. There's also the Vex with Exotech board that similarly works in another way. It does have less traits that you would want to maybe activate. It makes it a little bit awkward in certain spots. However, it is still something that you can play towards without having to consider exactly what the emblems are. Additionally, what I would say is one that's really common that people cash out into is Street Demon. Now, Street Demon does have some synergies that you can activate, but the main reason people cash out into Street Demon a lot of the time is because you're playing a Street Demon opener a lot of the times when you're playing Trait Tracker, right? You have the Mundo, the Rengar, the what's her name, the Zyra. So a lot of times you're playing this board and then it's really easy to transition into Street Demon. It also has the win condition of if you hit 2 Street Demon emblems, you can play your 10 Street Demon, which can help you to win the game in certain spots. That being said, you could try and make a creative board that activates all of the synergies that you see, all the emblems that you see. That's not, you know, I go for it, have fun. I don't know how it will work out for you, but typically you should always be aim towards like some of these type of boards, or have it in mind. Even if you're not playing one of these boards, at least have a final board in mind. For example, you could be playing around Marksman, Dynamo, whatever. Make flexible items if you really want to be open and flexible, and make a creative board. Sorry, this playlist always has this song at this point, so I'm just gonna skip it. But anyways, there's other traits and there's other comps that are activated by emblems as well. Think Urgot with Boombot. If you get a Boombot emblem, you can play around Urgot, 6 Boombot. You can always just look for one emblem that enables a really powerful comp, and then just use the other emblems for their items and their extra effects to strengthen your board a little bit more. But you should always have a plan. You should always be making items. You shouldn't just decide, like you can decide after you see the emblems if you want to lean between 1 or 2 comps, but you should still be putting yourself in a spot where you're not going to get too overwhelmed with emblems and items and board and units. You gotta have some sort of like game plan, which is really important. That's what I would always suggest. Additionally, there's emblems that can also enable comps and make them really strong. 6 rapid fire, 4 bastion or rapid fire bastion is really potent. And if you have a rapid fire emblem, rapid fire Renekton, this is like a go-to comp. If you hit this type of board, it's just not something you can reliably play around because you need the emblem to activate it. Marksman on Zeri, but also on MF is really powerful because she spreads with all of her bullets, so she activates the marksman frying pan effect, which is really powerful. There's also comps that you can remember from other things that you've played, right? Like Fiddlesticks Bruiser. If you have a Bruiser emblem and you have a spot where you want to angle maybe Fiddlesticks, or if you have a couple Fiddlesticks, you can stay on level 7 and then just roll for those units, because in a lot of these boards you're already activating Bruiser or playing Mordekaiser, so you can actually transition into a board like that. And then you have other things like I talked about in other comps, like Zeri with Dynamo could work really well. It synergizes like Zeri MF as a version of Exotech is also a possibility. I'll show that one to you as well, just because I think that it's something that could be very, very reliable. 1 second. So Exotech with Zeri is one that I didn't show you, but I'll show you right now. Looks kind of like... How do you spell Syndicate? I had a blank, sorry. Oops, wrong guy. Looks like this. So Zeri MF dual carry. So the idea is that you activate Rapid Fire with this Twisted Fate, and then you can activate Bruiser with the Darius, and you play MF and Zeri as dual carry. And this is a really strong board this current patch. It's like pretty good. You can often play towards it and do pretty well as long as you have good items for both the units and you have good Exotech items as well to support your Exotech board. But in general, there's always like a trait like this. If you played set 13, for example, trait Tracker into Scrap was really good because Scrap scaled off of items. So that's why I recommend as like, you know, your base level plan. Like, you know, obviously you can go for another type of plan, but your base level plan, you should always be considering Exotech when you see it. And then of course you could just be playing for your win con, right? You can easily just take trait Tracker. You can easily just take trait Tracker if you have like your win condition, your instant win, right? Like for example, if you're playing Anima, right, and you have an Anima emblem already, right, you know, on somebody else, obviously you can take trait Tracker to try and hit 10 Anima pretty efficiently, right? You can still play towards those win cons and you can play those boards that spike with those type of things. Of course, that's still a valid option. I'm not saying not to do that. What I'm saying is, in the more general case, even if you don't have a win condition spot like that, you can still play this augment and do really well in your game. That's the point that I'm trying to explain and trying to, like, you know, comfort you guys and give you guys some tips to like make it a little bit easier to play. Additionally, there's many different augment synergies that you can go for. One that comes to mind all the time is item collector, right? So like item collector, for every unique item you gain ability power and extra HP, I think, if you do item collector 2, right? So this is really powerful. If you have stuff that scales with items, these are things that can synergize and make you really powerful very fast. Additionally, of course, if you have emblems or any kind of emblems that can help out, Call to Chaos can also be crazy because it can give you more emblem cash and you just have infinite emblems and make a crazy style of board. But then there's also the ones that give you reforgers. So for example, Big Grab Bag is a common take a lot of the time, just because, like, you know, it's hard to make use of every emblem. But of course, even if you're not like strictly trying to make a very creative board, a reforger always helps because, you know, you could take 3 emblems and reforge all 3 of those emblems, right? Especially if they're not super meaningful to your board, and you have a good chance. If you're reforging one emblem repeatedly, that's like, you know, very low chance it's going to be something crazy. But if you reforge multiple emblems at once, because you have so many emblems, if you reforge 3 at once, there's a chance one of those 3 is going to hit something that's at least useful to your board. So it's actually pretty meaningful to have a reforger because you can like fix your cash out a little bit and reduce the amount of low roll that you have with those. Of course, I know some people really like their Pandoras. I think Pandora's a little bit too slow. I wouldn't necessarily say this is like a broken synergy, but you could go for this as well and just chase your win condition. I just think that, you know, it's a little bit anti-synergy because if you're like going for like Pandora's to chase a win condition, but then you also need the gold to level up, so you need the items to HP gain. Like, you know, be careful. I think this is a little bit riskier than some of the other stuff I was saying. I think it's more reliable to just like cash it out and play an Exotech board than it is to like, you know, play Anima and take Pandora's and then just wait till your emblems turn into Anima emblems and then go level 10, because you need to be level 10 to hit the, like, you know what I mean? Like, but whatever, you can also do that as well. That's another synergy that you can go for. If you're chasing like the 1st or the 8th, that's a good chance of you getting a 1st, right? There's a good chance you go 8th as well, but that's another thing you can do. But either way, regardless of if you're going for crazy win condition or not, you actually have a lot of potential to do really well despite that, because there are ways to make use of the frying pan synergies a lot more easily and give yourself a lot of team-wide buffs. I think those are all the notes. I don't have other important notes. I kind of intertwined it together while I was ranting. But either way, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was somewhat helpful. Just as a little final parting reminder, these are the boards that are the level 7 ones that have synergies that are really common. This is the one that I usually see that I usually see people going for, or that I usually see happening. And then this is the other one that I see that is very common that people end up going for. Both of them could fit in very nicely on level 7. They also use some 3 costs, which makes it easy to find the units on level 7 without having to roll too much if you're that type of player. And then additionally, there's this one. This one I don't use that much because it's not often that you're like holding on to all of these 1 costs, so it's a little bit awkward to hit, but it's also something you can look for. And then additionally, you can check out your own websites, whichever one you like. If you like Tactics.tools, which is the one I'm using, you can use this one, and then you can look at whatever level, put filters, and have a little bit of an easier time to get to the cash out. But anyways, thank you for watching. Hopefully you have a great day. I might do a couple other of these like how to play augment style videos if this one does a little bit better. So hopefully this was fun. Hopefully you have a little bit of, you know, a little bit easier of a time playing around it. And yeah, see ya. Bye bye.